point in South Africa, if you look at your legislation compared to ours, your legislation, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, is highly integrated legislation. So you've got your planning, your transport, your housing, your environment, all governed by one single piece of legislation.
No, there's different pieces of legislation.
But you've got a planning act, and it covers all that ground in one single document.
Oh yeah, I mean a development plan would have a transport, physical infrastructure, social environment, heritage. It's got all that.
But talk about, I think it's called the Planning Act.
Planning and Development Act. Yeah.
Planning that covers quite a lot of ground actually. And if you look at what's happening here with us, we've had about 7 pieces of legislation covering KwaZulu-Natal. We've managed to consolidate it in one, not maybe a very good product, but at least it's one. And you can always improve on that product, which we're trying to do. But now national intermediaries have come out with a very strong draft to say, no, local guys, we want to switch local. So now we're moving to probably 280 pieces of plan legislation in the country.
What?
Each on their own. And so you go from Itaqueni to Umsunduzi to Umgeni.
So you're not talking about plans.
New rules.
About legislation.
New rules. Yes, but I think it's again, like you said, it's a symptom from something else. It's just localism coming through and say we don't want one piece of legislation. It works quite well, and even if you can improve on the bits that don't work, we want our own, because you've got your own process, you want your own administration. We want to customize this for us. Now that's great, because municipality, I can understand maybe their systems doesn't fit in perfectly with the general system. Poor government, I think it's going to be a nightmare, because they've got to get schools in all those municipalities, and the rules will be different for each one of those municipalities. Or similarly, it's actually worse.
The zoning will be completely different in each other place.
Can I tell you what? I mean, I haven't mentioned it, but I've been the project manager for a thing called myplan.ie, which is a pulling together of planning information, flooding, where all the nature areas are, where all the settlement is, I don't know, it goes on and on, where all the monuments, historical monuments are, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on. And we have this myplan.ie, which pulls together all this data, and coming out of that, what we found is that there's about 400 separate plans in Ireland, okay? And in those 400 plans, virtually every one of them has a different, like, zoning categories. And that's not 100% true, because like in some counties, they might have adopted a relatively standardized kind of thing, more or less standardized between the different towns. That county is completely different from another county, and in the other county, the local areas there would be completely different, and there's no overall county pattern. So anyway, there's 400 plans, and that would be development plans and local area plans. And the approach, the zoning, even the colouring on the map is all different. It's absolutely, you can't see what on earth is going on. Okay, you can't, at a higher level, in any kind of real-life area, the patterns of what's happening and how does the zoning relate between this area and that, because in this case, residential might be yellow, in this case it's red, I don't know, it's something else. You can't even see what's going on. So what we've done is we've established this thing called myplan.ie, and this was a project for which I was responsible as the project manager. And we created a thing called what we call generalized zone types, GZT, which is a generalization of the blizzard of variety.
It's your interpretation, putting them into broader categories.
Yes, with a hierarchy. At the top level there's like 9, it's residential, industrial, or open, or whatever, and then under residential there would be, is the zoning basically about new residential or existing residential, break all this stuff down. So what we then did is we got the local authorities, in the case of all their plans, to categorize their zoning into the GZT categories. Okay? So that is available, and if you ever went onto myplan.ie and you go into the geo browser, stuff
It's kind of Rosetta Stone to interpret
what's going on?
schemes, yeah.
What's going on? And the interesting point about what I'm leading to is we started to manage planning data in a way more effective and efficient way than ever existed before, because it was each little kingdom doing its own thing, and through my plan, we started putting information together so you could see what on earth's going on. And the stage that we're now at is what we are doing is we're looking to see whether there's a standard set of zone classifications, and the planning authorities have no alternative but to use the nationally set standard categories of planning zoning. So it becomes not just pulling data together into a GZT with the zoning remaining the same. We're looking at legislation next year to actually require
But in many ways it comes back to what maybe I'm going to say, maybe one just got to view through the site and then exercise, make the walls up and come backwards, because you're not going to be able to persuade people to see there, you've just got to wait it out.
Yeah, it will have to swing, it's just too extreme. In terms of zoning classification, funny enough, but it's schizophrenic on the one, because on the one hand we're saying, let's all have local planning legislation, let's not have these provincial laws, let's do it all through bylaws. But on the other hand, we're doing a land use classification board, which is exactly what you're talking about now. They're standardizing nationwide at one, same department, same individuals, standardized nationwide in one context, but completely localized in the other. That was just going to wait through, because
you probably have to.
It's not sustainable.
In Ireland, if we hadn't have had that unbelievable crash, there wouldn't have been the mindset change which is what we now living through and working through, and as planners we're responding to with strategies, with the hierarchy of population targets, I haven't mentioned yet, but what our minister issues is guidelines. There's Section 28 guidelines, which is the minister has the authority to issue guidelines on whatever topic the minister wants. I mean, we have for example, on flooding, retail guidelines, how you should organize your retail stuff. I'm absolutely right involved with wind energy guidelines, how you deal through the planning system with wind energy. I mean, there's a whole raft of these guidelines. How to create urban places, how you should look at, from a planning perspective, how you should look at urban development, what you're trying to achieve, what are the right principles, all this kind of stuff. So the minister issues guidelines, and when a plan is produced, it needs to be aligned with the planning guidelines. Now the guidelines, depending on the guideline, there's different levels of generality in them. Some of them are more general than others, but one of the things we in the national government look at when a plan comes to us is, does it match with these ministerial guidelines? Because if it's not, that's a fairly serious problem actually, and it can ultimately lead to the minister issuing a direction, because the minister says this is good planning practice, and if you don't abide by it, and we, particularly at the staff level, because we're the ones closest to the ground, we know exactly what's going on. We think that this is a serious infringement to the guideline, then we make the case up to the minister to issue a direction. But now the propensity to issue directions is much greater now than it was in the Celtic Tiger era, because then hands off, you let the local people do whatever they want to do, and we just virtually don't issue guidelines. You might try and persuade people. Sorry?
It was just the euphoria of the time.
Oh, madness was
Money was being made and then yes. But it's over, you're over it now.
Thanks, Tom.
I've just read the papers recently that Ireland's coming out.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, our debt ratio is still 117%. The target is 16%. But Ireland was voted, I think, in the last 2 weeks by Forbes magazine as the best country in the whole world for doing business globally. Number one.
Why?
Sorry?
Why?
They have 11 criteria. How difficult to open a business, your rights as a business person, are they protected by the judiciary? You know, they are. There's a completely independent judiciary, which is very good. There's a legal system that supports. And just under $1 trillion worth of dollars of foreign direct investment in Ireland. Okay, South Africa was, I think, 193 or something. The whole of South Africa. You know, like little old Ireland has massive foreign direct investment into it. I mean, the headquarters of Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and a whole range of others for Europe, and in many cases Europe, Middle East and Africa. They tend to kind of link Africa, Middle East and Europe. The headquarters are sitting in Dublin, and these high-tech companies are just flooding. I mean, there's an IBM campus which has got 3,000 people working in it, something like that. Huge. And they are responsible for smart cities, you know, smart cities thing. They're responsible for IBM divides smart cities into different types of cities, and there's one category globally. The campus in Ireland is responsible for. Intel's got 5,000-6,000 people working for it, and so it goes just on and on and on and on.
That's the fellows on campus. They took you on as a South African, and they put all those lovely skills there.
No, because you see, this was the Celtic Tiger. They were absolutely didn't have the skills. So that's why they came looking.
That's why they advertise internationally.
Yeah. Well, no, it was in Australia and South Africa and I think Canada. So
Sneak off. Break up the party.